Okay, everyone, I'm going to go ahead and get the conversation started while everyone is lining up for some whiskey at the bar. First of all, I just want to say thanks to everyone for joining us for this night owl session tonight entitled Salt and Security, the Unclear Nuclear Dynamics. Personally, I can't think of a better way than to spend 10 p.m. on Wednesday than in a small, intimate room drinking whiskey and talking about nukes. So this is fun. Everyone here in this room has been paying close attention to geopolitics, treaties, alliances. And over the past few years, it seems like the issue of weapons of mass destruction, particularly nuclear weapons, is back in the limelight. Most recently from Donald Trump's announcement that he intends to pull the United States out of the INF Treaty, to the U.S. withdrawal from the JCPOA with Iran, to the ongoing negotiations, if you can call them that, between the United States and North Korea. I think it's clear today that this nuclear arms race that we thought was consigned to the dustbin of history will in fact continue to play a central role in geopolitics. And yes, it might be true that the issue of nuclear weapons is nothing new. There's a whole alphabet soup of acronyms for talks and treaties that have historically underwritten the nuclear order, from SALT to SALT II to SORT to START to New START. The list goes on. But today I think we're facing some new issues, a new age of fresh competition and the rise of new actors that challenge the very basis of the nuclear order. So how did we get here? Where are we going? What is the future of the nuclear order? And are we moving towards a world which both nuclear and technically non-nuclear states have decided to normalize proliferation and enable an arms buildup? So I'm thrilled to be joined tonight by this distinguished panel to answer some of these questions and to highlight some of the other big issues that we should be thinking about in the nuclear arena today. I'd like to go ahead and introduce them. Right next to me, I have Dr. Rajagopalan, a distinguished fellow and head of the Nuclear and Space Policy Initiative at ORF. Next to her is Dr. Dingli Shen, professor at Fudan University from China. We have Dr. Paul Kapoor, professor in the Department of National Security Affairs at the Naval Postgraduate School. Dr. Feodor Voitolovsky, director of the Institute of World Economy and International Relations. And finally, Dr. Sergey Rogov, president of the Russian Academy of Sciences. I'd like to start by giving each of the panelists a few minutes to dive into some of these questions and some of their research, and I'll then ask a couple of questions, and then we'll go to the audience. So, Raji, I'll go ahead and start with you.
Sure, thank you. Hi, good evening, everyone, and it's good to see a large number of people out here. I think it's a terrific panel that we have, and I think the two Russian colleagues, the American colleague, and the Chinese Shen. Thank you all, and to start off, I think it's a bit of a cliche to say that we are at crossroads or we are in a state of flux, but it also happens to be true in the case of the nuclear order that we are looking at in a sense. The nuclear non-proliferation order could go in any different directions. One, I think, where all these rules could go away and proliferation, like Rachel said, proliferation could become the norm in a sense. In fact, way back in 1963, J.F. Kennedy predicted that there could be around 25 nuclear states by the 1970s. But thankfully, we haven't seen that. We haven't seen that happening. But I think that was primarily because you had two key great powers, the US and the USSR, who saw that proliferation was not in their best interest. The two countries, both of them had an inherent interest in stemming the proliferation, deciding that proliferation was not good for the global stability and so on and so forth. So the two countries managed to come together and establish a strong non-proliferation regime, including the NPT. But today, I think the key question is, do we have all the key players agreeing that proliferation, nuclear non-proliferation, nuclear proliferation is bad? And I think, at least in rhetoric, certainly, all the countries do agree that proliferation is bad. But again, how do we take that into more meaningful steps in actually curbing proliferation, stemming the proliferation process? So I think it has been, I think, while all these key countries, all the major powers do agree that proliferation is bad, I think there have been various political issues that have come in the way of making an effective decision. So in a sense, the lack of consensus today among the major powers, among the key players, has been the key problem in facing the nuclear non-proliferation order today. So I think having all the countries not agreeing to a set of issues, set of problems, as well as the set of way to go about. I think that's been a key problem that will be faced with the facing the nuclear non-proliferation order. Second, one quick issue that I want to talk about is the American weakness. Clearly, without an enforcer, the regimes can't survive, can't work in a sense. So even the perception of a weak, the American power has created its own dynamics, leading to possible weakening of the nuclear non-proliferation regime. So even as the US continues to be the most dominant power, despite it being in relative decline, I think it still has certain consequences in terms of how willing the US is in terms of leading the global governance in this particular area. Clearly, of course, these are multilateral arms control measures that we are talking about, but you still need one key strong power to lead lead and sustain this normative process and so on and so forth, normative as well as sustaining the regime. So if the general US unwillingness to bear some of the global burdens today, if that is going to be felt in the nuclear non-proliferation regime, then there is going to be a certain amount of problems that are felt in this area. Of course, we are not there as yet. The US, for instance, has led both the Iran nuclear talks as well as how the North Korean talks are proceeding. So I think we are still not talking about the US completely withdrawing from some of the taking a burden or showing a strong commitment when it comes to the normative process in the nuclear domain. But I think if the weakness continues for a longer time, I think we could run into some trouble. Am I up with my time? Or?
Keep going, John.
Okay. So the U.S. weakening could have one another impact, which is going to be in terms of, for instance, how does it affect the allies in Asia and other parts of the world? What happens to the extended deterrence mechanism? I think that's going to be. So today, for instance, when you look around, I think there's greater talk about nuclear weapons in countries like South Korea, Japan, Australia, and so on and so forth. Again, these are very talks at the very low level, but the fact is that if certain trends proceed in certain direction, I think these could become a reality maybe 10 years from now and so on and so forth. So I think the bigger problem that is facing the nuclear non-proliferation domain is the shifting balance of power dynamics and how that is kind of leading to a certain amount of the crisis in decision-making, the lack of consensus that has become the key problem facing the nuclear non-proliferation domain. I'll stop here and I'll be happy to hear your thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Shen, over to you.
Firstly, I want to send my gratitude to ORF, Sergey and Samir for inviting me to this important event again. We are talking about a nuclear disorder. On the one hand, we do see some disorder. US, Russia are not proceeding their traditional pattern of cutting one nuclear arms treaty after another to reduce their nuclear stockpile. This doesn't seem to be the case at the moment. And they have huge difference regarding who is observing INF or not. And the US has said, given 60 days, if there is no proliferation, US will have action. US is saying, why China is modernizing? You should be a part of new INF. And the US has quit the JCPOA that it has hard work to produce. And even 2 years ago, US and North Korea are having some rhetoric war, madman or mad rockets, etc. Fury and fire. Given this, I would propose that China has a saying from bigger chaos to bigger governance, namely from bigger disorder to bigger order. It's a constant rebalancing. I never believed China-US would have some nuclear escalation. The US may have 10 times, 100 times more nuclear weapons China has had. And China has lived with it, doing trade. Now some people say, given the trade tensions, the two countries may have their relationship broken. And they may have a hot war rather than a warm war or cold war. I don't believe. Today, I got some good message from Beijing. After 3 hard talk negotiation in Beijing, the US and China might have achieved a good outcome. That would greatly reduce their trade tension, so this round of talk may not resolve all their differences. And China-US has multiple channels to communicate. It's very hard to have misunderstanding. We respect Americans' great strengths, and we hope Americans would respect China's legitimate need to respect our rights over the peaceful integration across the Taiwan Strait. Don't give hardship to us. Otherwise, we need to build some missile, not nuclear-tipped, mostly conventional. It's intermediate conventional force, not a nuclear force. So we have nothing to do with the new version of INF. But for conventional force, we have to address what's the reason why you give weapon to Taiwan. Even the US has quit the JCPOA, the rest of the 6 countries, so 5 of them, P5 minus the US plus Germany, are working hard with Iran to keep this framework integral. We cannot not afford to allowing it to collapse. It's about the regional peace and global security. China has a responsibility. If the US is unwilling to play its leadership role, the rest of the 5 need to work on it. Given our determination and our sense of responsibility, we should should have the assurance that this will be an issue, but it will not be explosive issue. North Korean leader has met with my leader 4 times within 10 months. After hard sanction, we partner with Russia, with US, and the international community. North Korea feels the pain. Therefore, they come to talk. It's a success of nuclear order, but not a perfect order. They have abandoned the nuclear weapon. Or they are going to abandon very quickly. But this is a less chaos. This is a less nuclear disorder. And President Trump and North Korean leader may have their second meeting. That's great. I only hope the meeting would produce tangible, implementable outcome, not just a talk. For empty talk, we need deliverable. So I see some pessimistic development. I also see some positive development. For positive development, the US has played a role over years. And for passive development, the US has also played a role. We should encourage Americans to always play a positive role, proactive role, constructive role, not a destructive role. But given President Trump's performance, US under President Barack Obama deserve credit on Iran. So I hope President Trump would have learned good experience of his predecessor to work with Russia, with China, to rebuild nuclear order, a good order, not a perfect order, but a far less disorder. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Paul?
Okay, great. Thanks, Rachel, for heading the panel, and to ORF for the invitation. These are my views only. They don't represent the views of the Naval Postgraduate School or the Defense Department. So I'll use my few minutes here to kind of question some of the assumptions of the panel, just to be contrarian. The topic paragraph that and Rachel quoted some of that language in her opening suggests that a great deal has recently changed in the nuclear environment, and that the very basis of the nuclear order is being challenged. How so? The defining feature of this new age that we're in apparently is, again, to turn to that language, that nuclear and also officially non-nuclear states are undertaking large-scale arms buildups and encouraging or engaging in proliferation, and thereby they're going to sort of normalize this phenomenon, and this is going to be something new. And so the question I would ask is, you know, well, are arms buildups and proliferation really new, right? Is that something that we haven't seen before? I'm not really sure. I mean, I think actually the nuclear era really, from the end of World War II to the present, has actually been characterized by arms buildups and by, by efforts by states, nuclear have-nots, to use the language of the panel, their efforts to acquire nuclear weapons. So, so I think it's not clear that we're really in some kind of a fundamentally new nuclear age. If you think about the Cold War, it was characterized by massive arms racing, the development of enormous U.S. and Soviet arsenals. There were, of course, successful efforts at arms control as well. We've heard a lot about some of them recently, like the INF Treaty. But the big picture, right, was that by the end of the Cold War, the two sides had tens of thousands of warheads, I don't know, 70,000 total, something like that, large and small, deliverable by a triad of delivery vehicles, land, sea, and air, pointed at one another. Now, at the end of the Cold War, U.S.-Russian relations thawed, and we did move into a less competitive environment, and there were significant arms cuts, and you know the numbers did fall dramatically, but still to the point where they had about 4,000 warheads each pointed at each other. But still, if you look at the big picture, even after those reductions, the two sides still had around 10,000 warheads deliverable again by land, sea, and air, pointed at each other, and those numbers of warheads expanded as China got into the nuclear game. Their arsenal size obviously is nowhere near the size of the U.S. and the Russians, but they're part of this as well. And they also possess a large inventory of ballistic and cruise missiles. So, I mean, if you think about, we look at the big picture, that's kind of the normal state of affairs. And even leaders and administrations who were philosophically committed to disarmament, it's not clear that they got all that much beyond the point of rhetoric. So the Obama administration, for example, called for global elimination of nuclear weapons, I think genuinely, and it did cut some weapons from the U.S. arsenal. But it also made clear in the 2010 Nuclear Posture Review that the United States would rely on nuclear weapons to perform all of their traditional deterrent missions, and in fact would invest significant resources in the nuclear enterprise to make sure that it was viable and in fact more effective going forward. And the arsenal size essentially remained the same. So again, I think more continuity really than change. What about the have-nots, the non-nuclear states? It's true that states not officially recognized as nuclear, like North Korea, have sought to and successfully in some cases acquired nuclear weapons. But the idea that nuclear have-nots would try hard to become nuclear haves is also nothing new. India and Pakistan for decades remained outside of the NPT regime and worked to develop nuclear arsenals, despite intense international pressure not to do so. By the late 80s or 1990s, they were de facto nuclear powers, probably a few turns of the screw away from actually having nuclear weapons, and then they tested in 1998. Since those 1998 tests, they've increased their nuclear capability significantly, both in terms of fissile materials, warheads, delivery vehicles, and so on. So again, not clear that there's anything fundamentally new going on when today's have-nots seek to become nuclear haves. It's been going on for really a long period of time. So the bottom line for me is if we're thinking about, are we in some kind of a new era? Obviously there's always change. I'm not saying nothing's different. But in reality, proliferating and also maintaining large competitive arsenals, or at least attempting to proliferate, has been the norm really since the dawn of the nuclear era, and it's not really a fundamental departure from usual practice. So I think there's more similarity here than change. Stop there.
Thank you, Paul. Feodor?
Thank you very much. First of all, we have to divide spheres of nuclear relations, nuclear military relations into two big parts, strategic and non-strategic. And if we will look attentively to the strategic sphere, situation will be the same till 2021 for sure, because Russia and the United States are still having START treaty, which is regulating numbers, verification process, and transparency measures on both sides, confidence-building measures. But in the sphere of non-strategic nuclear weapons, we are facing very, very dramatic and dangerous changes, which can, of course, influence significantly and dramatically on the sphere of strategic nuclear weapons too. First of all, the United States, Donald Trump's administration decision to withdraw from INF Treaty is one more step in the line which the United States have started in 2002 when they decided to withdraw from ballistic missile defense, anti-ballistic missile defense treaty. It's the next step in the same logic. This logic is based on the assumption that free hands in the sphere of arms control will give the United States more capabilities to build more flexible and more diversified system of deterrence aimed to deter different sorts of adversary. It was the logic of, for many years, it was the logic of John Bolton, who has become National Security Advisor in Trump's administration. And during last 2 decades, he was insisting on the necessity of the termination or limitation of arms control system, which has developed during the Cold War and existed in 2 post-Cold War decades. For many years, arms control system between the United States and the Soviet Union and then Russia has been based on several principles. First, confidence-building measures and transparency. Second, coordination and dialogue on further reductions and principle of reductions. And the third, very significant part of this was mutual guarantees. And on this system has been based on mutual assured destruction as psychological, military, and political motivation mechanism for relations in this sphere. What is happening now? Now we are entering into the very dangerous and controversial period when this system, which has been developed both for strategic and non-strategic nuclear weapons. I do not mean tactical nuclear weapons because it's another story. I mean only strategic systems and so-called intermediate and short range, intermediate range and short range ground-based missiles, which under the INF Treaty has been eliminated on both sides on the principles of zero potential. But right now, with eclipse of the INF Treaty, and I'm sure that the current treaty is going to history because of not because of mutual blaming on both sides, but because the United States are looking forward to have intermediate range and short range ground-based missiles, to use them as another option, another instrument, together with strategic nuclear weapons to deter China in Asia Pacific, and probably, if we will not find any compromise on this, to deter Russia in Europe and to influence not on Russian military security, because it is rather guaranteed with strategic nuclear arsenal, but on political relations between Russia and NATO, Russia and European Union. Because if such weapons, such systems would be deployed in European countries, it will dramatically change military political environment in Europe and will dramatically influence on global military political environment. What else I can add? I think that issue of INF Treaty is strongly interconnected with American developments in the sphere of ballistic missile defense. Because if you remember, George W. Bush wanted to have global and comprehensive ballistic missile defense, but it was too expensive, and they found out that they have significant deficit of technologies. Obama reduced it for Asia Pacific and for European theater according to comprehensive comprehensive adaptive approach, which means that they will develop different elements of this ballistic missile system according to the group of threat. In that time, it was hypothetic Iranian missile threat and North Korean threat. Right now, if the United States are withdrawing together with Russia from INF treaty, it means that the United States are receiving motivation and arguments for insisting on deployment of more effective ballistic missile defense system in Europe, and it is giving arguments for the future for the United States to insist on deploying of this system to protect from hypothetic Russian ground-based intermediate and short-range missiles, which Russia could develop in the future to protect European allies. The same but a little bit different thing in Asia. In Asia, deployment of such systems will be additional instrument, and it is, of course, aimed to deter Chinese nuclear potential, which about 50% is consisting of short-range and intermediate-range missiles. So we are entering into absolutely dramatic change of international security environment, and we need to take into account that more than that, that not only the eclipse of arms control system is influencing on this situation, but also such factors as development of hypersonic missiles and other systems, development of ballistic missile defense system, development of cyber warfare, and other elements and other systems which are systems of weapons which are influencing on strategic stability and strategic nuclear stability as its the most significant element. So we're entering into a more dangerous and more controversial world with unpredictable developments in terms of conflicts, in terms of mutual deterrence and mechanism. And I'm very skeptical about any options for multilateral agreements in the sphere of arms control. I can explain why. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Dr. Rogov?
Thank you. It's a great pleasure and honor for me to be here tonight. But before I make my presentation, I want to make 2 comments about the agenda. First of all, I learned that I have been promoted and appointed the president of the Russian Academy of Sciences. That's a big news for me, since the president of the academy is elected by secret ballot by 3,000 members of the academy, and I'm a modest man. I was just elected to the academic director of the Institute of USA in Canada of the Russian Academy of Sciences, like my colleague Feodor Voitolovsky was elected the director of the MMO. So thank you. The second surprise was when I read the title of the session, SALT. My God. SALT agreement was signed 47 years ago. Most of the people in this room were not yet born. How you managed to find SALT and include it in the agenda, since it's absolutely irrelevant to what is happening now, because what's happening now is the almost inevitable collapse of the INF Treaty and the START Treaty, and the complete collapse of the arms control regime. I said that I'm happy to be here because, well, this is a really very interesting arrangement for a panel when you can combine both business and pleasure and get drunk. And talking about the situation with nuclear weapons, I really feel like I want to get drunk if they give me some more cognac. Now about the issues. Let's face it. For half a century, strategic stability, and as Dr. Voitolovsky mentioned, was based on arrangements made by the then two superpowers, the Soviet Union and the United States, who negotiated the terms of the competition in the nuclear field. Arms control is not disarmament. Yeah. Arms control is something else. It's quite often forgotten that neither the United States nor the Soviet Union has any desire to disarm. But they wanted to negotiate the rules of the game, the rules of the competition. And these rules today are collapsing. If we look at the writing on the wall, in July 2019, the United States will withdraw from the INF Treaty. And that would be a major blow to what already is a rather weakened arms control regime, since the ABM Treaty is dead, some other agreements are dead, and some other treaties like the NPT are half dead, half alive. And the new start in this situation, which expires in February 2021, will also probably be the last nuclear strategic arms control agreement, since there will be, if the INF Treaty is dead, there will be no prolongation of this treaty. And for the first time in 50 years, there will be a situation when we are in a nuclear competition with absolutely no rules of the game. It's extremely dangerous, and I'm very sorry that so few people are concerned about it. I'm talking about those people in this room. Because when people talk about some nicer issues, you had Dunbar and other big places with people thinking that's a top priority. But in my view, the top priority is to do something as soon as possible to prevent what could be a disastrous situation. Since unlike the original Cold War, it's not going to be a bipolar competition, it's a multilateral competition, with a number of countries being engaged. And there are new technologies which blur the border between the traditional definition of strategic weapons and so-called conventional or non-nuclear weapons. This is something which is happening in a situation when we have very tense situation in some regions like the South China Sea or the Black Sea and the Baltic Sea, when you can expect sooner or later an accident which may result in an escalation. I'm not trying to frighten you, but let's face it. If the INF Treaty is dead, not only the United States, but also Russia, will develop and deploy a new generation of medium-range missiles. How many? By the INF Treaty, the Soviet Union had to destroy 1,846 intermediate range and short range missiles, and the United States 846 missiles. So we can only speculate how many missiles Russia and the United States will deploy in both Asia and Europe. And that will have dramatic consequences, first of all, for my country, which will have to fundamentally change its nuclear posture. It has been based on the idea, which rather difficult to translate into English, ответно-встречный удар. Only those who know Russian understand what it is. My translation, which is not perfect, is retaliatory simultaneous counter-strike. So we are not the first, but we are not the second. And if the United States deploys the new generation of medium-range missiles in places like Baltic states, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, or Poland, the flight time of those missiles to Moscow will be just 4 minutes. That means that Russian nuclear posture on retaliation, simultaneous counter-strike becomes impossible. There will be simply no time to figure out by the Russian early warning systems what missiles were launched, what is the trajectory, what are the targets they are going to hit. And that means that Russia probably will shift, and that's my speculation, that's not the Russian official position, to a new posture of a preemptive strike. So when there is a crisis, use them or lose them. That, of course, is extremely dangerous in terms of Russian-American, Russian-NATO situation, because the United States also will adopt the preemptive strike posture. But it will have much broader consequences, and since I have the pleasure to be here, let me say a few words about very negative consequences for India. The collapse of the INF Treaty will seriously jeopardize Indian national security. Why? Because the deployment of the new generation of American and Russian medium-range missiles in Asia, vis-à-vis China, of course, the United States will openly be doing it against China. Russia will be doing it against Martians, or, you know, those little green people who can come from some other place in outer space. But China, which has until now, as Dr. Shen, Professor Shen said, a rather modest nuclear posture. Well, people speculate about 300 nuclear weapons or less, but some people, including some Russians like me, think many more. But, okay, let's say 300. But China will have to respond. And China will build up, and China possesses a huge arsenal of medium-range and intermediate-range missiles, hundreds. About 1,500 of intermediate-range missiles. Of course, well, there are no official numbers, so these are speculations, these are estimates, and only some of them are nuclear capable. So one can envisage that China will respond by making more of these missiles nuclear capable. Besides, as you know, well, China is continuing to modernize and build up its long-range strategic nuclear forces. And that will force India to react. So what I'm talking about is a vicious action-reaction chain. So India will have to build up and build up significantly to maintain the balance, which is nicely described as mutually assured destruction. And what about Pakistan? Of course, Pakistan will build up. And who has much bigger incentive for a preemptive strike? Pakistan, of course. Because otherwise Pakistan is not going to survive in case of a conflict with India. So I'm describing the doomsday scenario, which is a nice idea before going to bed. Think how well we will destroy the world and our countries. But let me finish by saying we have to reinvent the arms control. The old arms control is collapsing. Basically, we would like to preserve the bilateral Russian-American agreements, but they're insufficient in a multipolar world. And we need really a very serious brainstorming effort. And I hope there will be questions later so I can enlighten you what kind of brainstorming we should do.
Thank you very much. So in the interest of time, we have about 15-20 minutes left. So I want to go straight to audience questions because I want to make sure that everyone gets a chance to jump in if they'd like to. So what we're going to do, I'm going to take 3 questions at once. These have to be short. They have to be a question. I don't want a speech or I will cut you off because I want everyone to be able to jump in here. So if you have a question, please raise your hand. Keep it brief. Thanks. Go ahead.
My name is Vladimir. Just a question to Mr. Rogov. What kind of brainstorming do you have?
Excellent question. Do you have one?
Shen. So there was widespread attitude that since we have bilateral consultations and then talks between Russia. There is widespread attitude that there is necessity to have 3 bilateral talks, consultations between Russia, US, and China on future of arms control, on future of strategic stability, on definition of strategic stability. What's your attitude to this issue and to this idea? And my question to you is, do you see any prospect for multilateral arms control, and how do you see this from the point of view of India and Indian participation in this? Thank you.
Sir, one more. Ma'am, go ahead.
My question is to Ms. Radha Gopalan. Ma'am, do you feel that it is finally time for India? And I would also like your comments on our no first-use policy. Thank you.
Perfect. Raji, I'll start with you, if that's okay.
Okay, just give me a couple of seconds.
Okay,
Maybe I
yeah,
can start
Dr.
with
Rogov, you can go ahead.
India, like China, and other nuclear weapon states, except Russia and the United States, until now, take the position that arms control is not their business, that the big guys, Russia and the United States, should do it, and they're so small, and their nuclear arsenals are irrelevant. That's why they should not get involved. I think this position should be fundamentally reconsidered. Definitely, I'm not suggesting that India or China should join the INF Treaty, because if they sign the INF Treaty, it will be unilateral disarmament for both China and India and a few other countries. But does it mean that we can use only those tools which were developed 50 years ago, 40 years ago to negotiate arms control arrangements? Some other means, first of all, in terms of transparency, confidence building measures. And I many times asked my British, French, Chinese, and Indian friends, ideally, if you were the Tsar What would you like to get if you are involved in the nuclear arms control negotiations? What will be your goal? And I never got an answer. Because there have been no serious, I don't want to offend anybody, but there have been no serious thinking what you can do except just joining those terms which were negotiated by Russia and the United States. They are not acceptable. Those terms are not acceptable to you. Let's try to think about something else. And time is running, and we don't have much time before, by the middle of the next decade, we can have enormously bad developments in this area.
Dr. Rajagopal?
Okay. Thank you. I think the first question, the future of multilateral arms control, in the nutshell, the answer is quite bleak. I think I think every major power agrees that we need to have strong multilateral policies, postures in place, arms control measures in place. But I think that's more into rhetoric. But if you look around, if you look at the number of negotiations, whether it relates to nuclear or any other security-related subject you take, I think the lack of an agreement among the major powers have been coming in as a major handicap in developing an effective arms control measure. And this is, I don't think this is going to go away in the near future. Unfortunately, this is going to be the characteristic for a foreseeable future when the balance of power is shifting and there is no clear understanding as to. Until and unless there is certain amount of stability of that kind, I think reaching a sort of conclusion, reaching an agreement among the major powers is going to be a serious problem. So in a nutshell, the answer is it's going to be quite bleak. There are not going to be any effective arms control measures in the making immediately, especially the multilateral ones. What is quite feasible in the meantime would be practical, pragmatic steps, more of technical steps to kind of make sure that we don't get into bigger troubles in the neighborhoods, whether it is in Asia, Middle East, and so on and so forth. But I think reaching a larger multilateral arms control involving all the major powers is going to be not possible in the immediate term framework. Time for India to formulate the nuclear policy. I think we do have I think you're referring to the nuclear strategy, nuclear doctrine that we have in place. We do have a policy in place, and is it time for India to review it on a fairly periodic basis? I would go along the lines of saying that it is important that we review it on a fairly periodic basis, not when each time when the government comes into office, but I think we could come into an agreement maybe every 5 years, depending on the security changes in the security environment, but also the technological changes that are coming about would dictate us to actually look at and review the foreign nuclear strategy in a sense. So I think that's a good policy. On the NFU question, I think we have something that's one of the major pillars of India's nuclear strategy, that is the no first use. I don't see any change in that particular aspect. There has been some debates in the last year or two, but I think those have been some comments that have been picked up from somebody's statements. For instance, when the Defense Minister Parekh said, okay, that was my personal comment, not on a... But I think there's no personal or official about it, but when he's speaking, whatever capacity, I think when he's a defense minister, it is an official policy. But the bigger point is that I don't think there is going to be a change in the India's nuclear posture in that sense. The NFU policy will continue to be the guiding factor for India.
Thanks. Dr. Shen, did you want to go ahead and answer the question?
Making it clear, I'm not government. And we know that the structure of China nuclear force is unclear. It's not announced, not in the public domain. So it will be very difficult to address this issue when one does not know the information and the detail. But given this, we still know that China has a limited number of nuclear weapons. Per Western estimate, it's around a few hundred nuclear weapons, a small number of few. Someone suggests maybe 300 or maybe 200. Then, when US and Russia has thousands, China definitely considers that even in the 21st century, it's still nuclear arms control is still the business of the big guy, not us. But some say China may have built a quite sizable, impressive fleet of Navy vessels equipped with ICF, intermediate-range conventional missile. They may have some ability to deter, but with very small tactical significance, not strategic. When we do not discuss to restrain or to ban a category of strategic weapon, but to discuss to limit the category of intermediate range conventional missile, I think it's off the target. And why China build? Because we have a dream to make the nation integral. Among all major countries, only China has not integrated its territory. And the US is giving weapons to Taiwan, saying US does not support independence, but the US certainly does not support unification. But we think it's within our sovereign realm. It's our business. And if the US would not intervene, we may have a peaceful settlement. If the US is determined to intervene, either we are deterred, or that would drive us to build more conventional intermediate range conventional missile, not a nuclear missile. So US has to address why US need to drive China crazy to deter the US in the conventional realm. Could we sit, China-US sit, just like they sit over the last three years in Beijing? That's the fifth round to settle trade dispute. China-US also need to sit down to discuss their Taiwan dispute. And over time, I think they may not resolve the problem, but they would better understand and better respect. That would fundamentally make China not to build a case why we need this conventional weapon. And then India may feel less pressure that China is not promoting a regional chain reaction that would also drive Islamabad to the game. US-Russia need to talk. Why Russia has not violated INF, and how US can present evidence. How to understand the US push of the NATO expansion would definitely make a Russian feel upset. Is it necessary to drive Russia to build another thousands of nuclear INF? It's unnecessary. US would not become any more secure. So this is my recipe. Sit down to talk. We can revise the agreement, but we should not abandon the agreement. That serves no purpose of nobody. China definitely would not benefit when we drive India to be crazy. What China can benefit? We only want to balance the US threat, but India would consider that with China added capability, they feel uncomfortable. We don't want to make India and Pakistan comfortable, as our two leaders met twice last year. This year I saw a bigger Chinese contingent in this dialogue over the last year. Why? Modi and Xi Jinping improve the relationship. When you improve relationship, people would more interact. Then we better understand India. India better understand China. Then we build less. Let's race for peace, not race for weapon. Thank you.
Thank you. So we have about 5 minutes left. So I'm going to ask Paul and Feodor to offer a couple of comments, and then unfortunately we're going to have to wrap it up.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Rachel. First of all, sphere of nuclear deterrence and of nuclear weapons is the sphere where we have to be very correct with figures, with numbers, and with vocabulary. That's why when Dr. Shen mentioned that Russia and the United States are having thousands of strategic nuclear warheads, I would like to correct him and to tell you that according to the START agreement, Russia and the United States are possessing 1,550 warheads and about 700 devices, the delivery devices. And the critical question about the future and about future developments in the sphere of our arms control is how and in which direction Chinese strategic nuclear capabilities will develop. The United States, and non-strategic also, the United States and Russia, according to INF Treaty, are not having intermediate, medium, and short-range missiles. China is having. Of course, our American partners are taking into account the figures of military budget of China, which is now, according to official figures of Chinese government, 3 times bigger than Russian military budget. And according to figures of Stockholm Institute of Peace Research, is about 400 bigger, 4 times bigger than Russian military budget and 3 times bigger than Indian military budget. Of course, in their future military planning and projections and their forecasts, they are taking into account these figures, and they are also including nuclear, strategic, and non-strategic weapons as part of these military spannings in their planning. So, of course, they are entering into the very specific situation when they have to deter with both strategic and non-strategic nuclear weapons, Russia and China. Of course, if China would be really interested in developing, dialogue with the United States and Russia on strategic and tactical, for example, nuclear weapons, it can be one story. But China is, unfortunately, as Dr. Shen mentioned, is still not transparent in this field, and preferring to ignore dialogue between 2 major players on this scene. Concerning India, I have one small remark adding to what have Professor Rogov said. India is the unique country. I can mention only one more country in the world, but it is a special story, which doesn't have relations of mutual deterrence both with Russia and with the United States. That's why India can use this unique role to initiate multilateral initiatives, dialogue on these issues, and to be a global player as developing democracy with growing global ambitions. And there is only one country which has the same situation, which doesn't have deterrence relations with both Russia and the United States, is Israel. But Israel is a very special story because of its nuclear military program, which is completely untransparent and still top secret. That's it. Thank you.
Thanks. Paul, you have final word.
Okay. Just real quick, I tried to make the point that maybe not all that much has changed in the nuclear environment. I think part of the argument that we heard here was that, potential departure from certain treaties, like INF Treaty, is really the thing that's pushing us into this new world. And I'll just continue my contrarian vein. I'd like to see a world in which we stay in the INF Treaty as opposed to not. But the question is, how much does it really change? As it's been noted, China is not part of the INF Treaty, so it doesn't really affect and hasn't affected the Chinese at all. A large percentage of Chinese weapons would be non-compliant under the INF Treaty. Also, the INF Treaty does not cover air and land-based intermediate systems, so those have always been air and sea, excuse me, that's what I meant. Air and sea-based systems, those have always been in the mix. They would continue to be in the mix. Don't know how much really changes there. Does this put us on a nuclear hair trigger? I think we hear that a lot. To make that case, I think you need to show that nuclear use is much more likely with the intermediate range forces that will appear as a result of treaty abrogation than without them. Is that true? Maybe, but you'd have to explain exactly how that works. Is it that deployed forces are more likely to come into contact with conventional attack? Is it that command and control loss is more likely? Is it do leaders think about these types of weapons in a more reckless way, and they're therefore just a lot more likely to use them? I mean, there's got to be some kind of a logic train to show where the hair trigger comes from. I'm not sure about that. I think for me, at the end of the day, strategic stability is the result not of rules of the road, although rules of the road are good, but of deterrence. And the reality is that nuclear use, any nuclear use, would be catastrophically costly, with or without the INF Treaty. And that's what's maintained strategic stability and what I think will continue to do so into the future.
Paul, thank you. Please join me in thanking our panelists, and thank you for staying out until 11 p.m. tonight.